All right, good afternoon. I'm Dr. James Gilley, as he said. I'm from Nicholls State University. The title today is The Economics of Mars, Ghost Acres, Resource Extraction Services, and Long-Term Political Economic Considerations for Space Settlement. Just to give you a bit of forewarning, this isn't going to be any economic evaluation. If you're expecting numbers here today, you might want to go find another track to be in, but I'm very glad to have you all aboard here today. Also, this is a very small piece of a much larger piece of research, and we're only going to focus on a small sliver of this. This is a chapter from a forthcoming book that I have called Space Civilization. Should be coming out sometime next year. It's under review as we speak, so if any of you are my reviewer, please be kind. So what we're going to be focusing on today is this notion of incentives, right? The incentives and challenges for a Martian political economy. At the core for this entire work is this notion that pretty much everything is going to be driven by economic incentives. Right? I know that we are all in this for the love of Mars. I see 5 people in the front row with the Occupy Mars t-shirt on. Mine's dirty from yesterday, so I can't join you today, but I'm there with you in spirit. But what we have to realize is that we do live in a world driven by politics. Which that means there's going to be economic incentives involved in everything, right? So understanding the incentives and challenges of the economy is really going to be key to a successful Martian settlement effort. So I can actually see it. I really highlight 4 elements in the chapter that we're going to be discussing a little bit today. The first thing that I deal with are the overall economic incentives to fund a settlement attempt, looking at both public-private and public-private partnerships. What we're going to be focusing in on today is actually evaluating the value of Mars. I'm not doing a financial valuation. I'm going to be doing kind of a backed-out valuation, looking at the idea of value itself. I'm also going to be looking at economic incentives for individual settlers. Yes, while we would probably all pay to go, that's not going to be the case to truly build a civilization on the face of Mars. We're going to have to pay construction workers. We're going to have to pay essentially resource extraction drillers. We're going to have to pay maids, janitors, etc. Again, I'd probably pay for the opportunity to sweep floors on Mars, but that's not everyone. And finally, I address long-term incentives, right? So incentivizing long-term political economic thinking. How can we build the notion of terraforming Mars into the economic assumptions of a Martian settlement? So let's really focus on that second part here. I think that's kind of the novel thing to deal with today. I'm very heartened to see so many people interested in kind of the social science side of Mars. It made me happy being here. I feel like I found my people. So the big question, and this was actually addressed yesterday in a great in a great talk, addressing value. What is value for Mars? Right? So the definition of value, right, is importance, worth, or usefulness. Right? So this is more than just a numbers game. Numbers matter, but this isn't a numbers game. So how does Mars fit into value for humanity and for individuals, right? And for corporations, for everyone, right? How do we value Mars? Because at the end of the day, there is a financial calculus for return on investment that is going to be necessary to secure funding and settlers for Mars, right? The big macro thing, and each and every person that wants to or will be driven to go to Mars. So we need to determine what this value can be, or what this value should be, what this value is. So when I look at economic value, when I see Mars, right, I see 4 main avenues for filling out this economic calculus. The first is kind of the most traditional thing, right, resource extraction from Mars. And spoiler alert, I'm kind of going to hit this one right in the face. It's not so great. The second, and I think this is getting more to the core of the matter, is this notion of treating Mars like the city of Houston, right? Using it as a way to service resource extraction in a much more accessible place, specifically the asteroid belt. Third, right, we hear this one all the time, in situ resource utilization. I say resource extraction, but what I'm talking about is really ISRU. And the final thing, and this is where I think the most value for Mars is in this concept of, quote, ghost acres. And I think this is really where the true value is going to lie. And we'll get to that in a moment. So let's look at the first avenue, economic value from resource extraction. Right? Now, this isn't a pure value proposition, right? Mars may have all of these great minerals and resources on it, great for us to use, but there's one big problem: gravity. Right? We might want to, like humanity has done for the last 500 years, pull resources out of the ground and bring them back to where we would use them. But we don't, right? The problem of shipping things back across the ocean is one thing. Getting them into orbit is another thing. Right? Getting them to orbit and then to another planet's orbit is an even bigger thing. Now, while Mars has a lower gravitational well, making things easier to get up to orbit, making that plane change between orbits is really expensive from a monetary perspective, from a resource perspective, and from a change in velocity perspective, which is our biggest problem with pure resource extraction. Right? So we're not going to be shipping Martian iron back to Earth's boundaries. That's just a bad value proposition, especially when it's literally just floating out there, and we'll get to that in a bit. On the other hand, pulling things out of the ground and smelting them and using them on Mars for the development of a civilization is a much larger and better value proposition. Right? I'm probably preaching, I know I'm preaching to the choir, I see it in the front row. Martian resources should be used for developing Mars. Right? Now, there are certain, right, there needs to be a return on value for that, but we'll get to that in a minute. So if we are going to be shipping things back to Earth, it should probably be, at bare minimum, finished goods. Right? So that, in turn, says that there is some sort of Martian industrial capacity in order to get a return on the resources of Mars. But even better is intellectual property, ideas, knowledge, research. That's really the main resource that can be extracted from Mars, right? The hardship of living on Mars, the innovation necessary to build a new civilization. That's the stuff that you can ship back to Earth for the big bucks, although that requires intellectual property rights regimes. We'll punt on that one for a moment. So at the end of the day, resource extraction and exportation is probably not an economically viable value proposition for Mars. Gravity's a bitch, y'all, and it's not going to make it easy to send things back to Earth. So we need to think of another value avenue to walk down. So this is where I start looking at Mars resources as much better for resource services. The city of Houston, right? I'm from Baton Rouge. I got friends that live in Houston. I teach at Nichols State University. Hands up, anyone's ever heard of Thibodaux, Louisiana? Yeah, in the back. All right, good for y'all. Thibodaux, Louisiana is the closest to the coast. If there were to be a hurricane sneeze in our direction, we'd probably be underwater. But everyone that lives and works in Thibodaux that doesn't work at the university or the hospital is an oil field worker. Thibodaux does just fine helping support resource extraction where it's viable. You could probably drill in the swamps and do all right. But if you go just a little bit further out, it's much easier to get the resources, oil, that fund the economy. The same thing is I believe to be somewhat true for Mars, right? The real resource extraction industry in this solar system, leaving apart helium-3 or really exotic things, it's in the asteroid belt. We want to get the resources from the asteroid belt. That's the big prize. That's where the gold rush is. It is much easier to get to orbit. It's a shorter trip to orbit from the asteroid belt. Your delta V's are much better from Mars to the asteroid belt. So additionally, back to that research and development of technology, Mars is in a much better place to service the asteroid belt than just Earth, and it's going to be difficult to bring up a full asteroid belt economy from zero. So at least having a planetary base that's already got resources where we have some gravity to help us out, that's probably, or at least the early stage of value for Mars. Mars could also be very good for the finishing of resources. If you're building a civilization, you have the industrial capacity to refine the goods and services, well, and provide the services that you need for Mars, right? And even then, right, right, Phobos, Deimos, you could perhaps use those as, in my mind, I call them the Martian Shanghai, not Martian Shanghai, Martian Singapore, right? So where you're transshipping everything from Earth, from Earth, Mars, the asteroid belt. You use that as kind of the geopolitical node to get through the celestial Malacca Strait. So it's much easier to supply belt resources extraction with Martian resources, right? That's where we're really getting our, right? That's kind of the real industrial base there. Also, there's questions that living and working on a planetary environment is probably better than just living on asteroids, the pure void. I love the O'Neill habitat things. I think those are great. I like the notion of spinning up asteroids, trying to give us artificial gravity to live out there. But at the end of the day, we grew up on planets. We're evolved for planets. I know Mars creates massive difficulties beyond just Earth, but at least it's a planet. That's why there's 3 question marks there. That one needs to be baked a little more. ISRU, I feel like most of this conference has been about that, right? In situ resource utilization. So using Martian resources to build Mars, right? That's ultimately what's at the core there. Right? Some creation of finished goods for export, but the main core is that you use Martian resources, you extract them for Mars, right, and for the development of Mars itself. So where that comes in is the other avenue, right, the quote ghost acres that I talked about already. The true economic value of Mars is Mars, a chance to build a new civilization, a chance to relieve the Malthusian pressures, as is often thrown around it. Now, I can't claim this great idea from my own, right? This is derived from the work of Kenneth Pomeranz, his 2000 book, The Great Divergence, which sought to explain why there was this great reversal of fortune, why English civilization flourished, whereas Chinese civilization did not. The answer that he came up with is that England expanded to North America. Right? The Chinese civilization, there's institutional arguments, but in large part, it used up the land that it had. It filled it up, it kind of plateaued. That's not to say that there weren't a lot of great things that came out of the Chinese civilization, but they fell into the Malthusian pressure. This isn't necessarily about using up all of our resources, it's just efficiently using the resources that you have. You plateaued. Europe, on the other hand, finds an entirely new continent. Well, there was already stuff here. There were already people here. They might have, straight up carjacked the continent, but here they are. They used it. So they found these ghost acres, right? They found acres that were just out there, trees and coal and iron and all the things that were needed for an industrial revolution, right, to completely change our economy. We're just sitting here. Had England continued to fill up and use up all of its land, who knows, it could have plateaued like China did. But what Pomeranz argues, and which I think he's onto something here, is that humanity was able to avoid its Malthusian fate, right? Filling everything up, being ready for the next technological leap, because they found new resources, right? I am 100% behind Dr. Zubrin when he says, right, Malthusian pressure is not really a thing, but the reason why it's not a thing is because we're human and we find resources. We get better at using resources. We get better at coming up with new ways to find new resources in general, right? The Malthusian pressure is still there. The only reason why it hasn't bitten us on the ass is because of guys like Norman Borlaug, because of anyone that has come up with any new innovation, right? We defeat Malthus. It doesn't just not happen by nature. And what Mars allows us to do is it is our new ghost acres. It is new resources, and it is a new place for us to go and continue to develop our civilization in the face of Malthusian pressures. So Mars represents economic potential for developing an entirely new world. We can develop a new instance of civilization, right? That's what we're mostly all here about. My Occupy Mars guys in the front, thank you all for sitting there. So this is growth for humanity, or parts of humanity, right? We could get deeper into national space settlement versus Mars, right? Independent Mars, that's a whole other chapter in my book. We can talk about that later. But what this ultimately results in is growth for humanity and growth for Mars. Right? So developing a civilization from whole cloth has huge economic value. Right? What's the biggest, one of the biggest sectors of the economy, right? When the economy's booming, what do we all point to?
Service.
Right? Well, services are good, but building new stuff.
Yeah.
Building from scratch an entire civilization is a huge economic sink, but if you're spending a lot of money, that means you're spending a lot of money growing something. So that's where I think Mars really shows its greatest value. Okay? Mars provides us an opportunity to continue to grow until our next great technological leap. Right? Technological singularity, warp speed, who knows what that would be, right? Us standing on this side of it, we don't know what it is. In 1720, they didn't know what an industrial revolution would really be. But this gives us a chance to continue to grow. Right? But the only way this works is if we adopt the correct institutions to allow us to successfully build a new civilization. That's a whole lot to get into, and I've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm just going to let that one lie there like a bad rug. But what the Ghost Acres of Mars allow us to do is to move towards long-term planning, long-term thought, and to think about how we can truly go about building a new civilization. So making Mars a livable planet, right? That blue one on the right hand, I guess the far left-hand side, right? That's a huge opportunity for return on investment, right? The ability to actually be a part of building a new civilization. Had someone known that the city of Boston or the city of New York were to become that, that is a massive potential, right, avenue for value. So a couple of conclusions, and again, this is just a very tiny part. Well, it's about a quarter of a chapter in an 8-chapter book. But what the conclusions from this really show are that there are many different aspects of a Martian political economy that need to be explored. Right? That's what we're doing here. That's what this, at least this track of this conference is all about, is exploring what Mars means, right? Figuring out what the questions that we need to answer are, right? We're not even at the point where we're answering questions. We're still trying to figure out what they are. We need to do that. But that doesn't mean we can't do it, right? We understand that there are traditional incentives and challenges involved, and they still generally apply. Costs, benefits, that's still there. Mars does have a distinct economic value, and while I greatly look forward to going and see the resource extraction panel tomorrow, see if I talk about what they're going to potentially ship up, what would be worth that, I think that Mars has a distinctly different economic value than we've traditionally been seeing. And it's all about Malthusian pressures. Dr. Zubrin hit it on the head the other night. Right? We relieve the Malthusian pressure via discovery and innovation, and Mars is the great frontier for that at this point. So the biggest value, in my opinion, for Mars comes simply from its existence as a frontier for us to go to develop. So thank you all very much for showing, and questions? Hand over the back first.
I didn't really think about this before your speech, and I'm sorry if it's detrimental to your speech, but do you see the value of Mars diminishing ever? Do you see us screwing it up, I guess is the basic.
So do humans show up and ruin the party and
Yes.
break it? Possibly. One of the later chapters in my book deals with interplanetary extinction level wars. That's what I leave off with. Humans are the greatest benefit to Mars and the biggest danger.
Thanks.
Regarding shipping things up from the surface of Mars, the one thing that occurs to me is, that this is kind of the perfect environment for a mass driver, right? You put the ejection port on the top of Olympus Mons, and you're basically in space already. Absolutely. And all you need to do is you don't have the drag problems.
Yeah, that and also space elevators, right? Both of those present, right? I mean, I obviously know that is not necessarily a whole, but I still think that, right?
It's down the road.
Yeah, it's way down the road. And the other important thing there is that why would you fight gravity when the same resources are already just floating up there? Right, that's kind of my thinking there. All right, I saw some hands over here. Yes, sir.
You know, so I think you made some great points. There's going to be a lot of money needing to be invested. I guess initially from Earth.
Yes.
What currencies are you thinking about? And when goods and services are sold on Mars, what will be the medium of exchange? Will there be banks on Mars, and will wealth be accumulated on Mars?
The answer to all of that is good questions. And I mean that in the most sincere way. This is a big field, a big open question, and I can't do this all on my own, right? None of us can do this all on our own, and that's really outside my wheelhouse. I'm not a traditional. I'm not an economist. I'm a political economist, but I mostly focus on governance and institutions and kind of backed my way into this. So I think those are all great things. Right? I think there's something to be said about resource-based currencies, although those resources might be nitrogen as opposed to gold or platinum or whatever. So those are very much questions that need to be answered. And I've got maybe some preferred things that I have, but I don't have the answers. I barely have the questions at this point. So yeah, very good question. Thank you. Let's go over there.
Bruce McKenzie here. Would you define ghost acres? Like, is it an empty acre waiting to be developed, or have you already developed it and you're selling it to?
So the way that Pomeranz defines it, talks about it, is it's essentially acreage that has not been developed. It's not necessarily pristine land, but it's
Florida swampland.
Well, the way that he really talks about it is Virginia in 1593 or something like that. I guess today our closest thing to ghost acres might be like everything west of the over here.
And at 4:30 in the big hall, I'm giving a talk that will touch on space elevators and exports.
You're the guy I wanted to go see. All right, yes, I'm coming to your talk. Okay.
Give me figures.
Yes, sir.
So with regards to the asteroid belt being a potential destination from this point, sort of the oil worker analogy, did you look at Phobos and Deimos as more like the starting point for that?
Yeah, I think Phobos and Deimos play a huge role in this. I think one of the first things that should happen is that we should turn either Phobos or Deimos, I don't know, I'm not the hard science guy, one of those should essentially be like our port city. And the other one could be the industrial, right, an industrial element to that. They're very key to the whole Mars project. So,
Would you say a likely central export from the Martian surface would be the oil rigs, essentially? Should Mars basically be aiming to gun for that state of development where they can start sending off the equipment to mine the asteroids?
I think that should be key to the economy. I don't think that's necessarily be the thing. I think the thing is developing Mars, but right, they're going to need some involvement in that that oil race, but right, the oil rigs. Everett Dolman, I don't know how many of y'all have seen him, has applied like orbital dynamics to like geopolitics in astropolitique, and he kind of gets into a little bit of that, although private space didn't exist when he wrote that, so it's a little bit skewed. But yeah, I think that the whole exporting oil rigs is a great idea, as a metaphor.
Yeah, so you mentioned geopolitical economy, and I know like there's obviously a lot of things that need to be explored further, but in terms of economic models, have you given any thoughts to what you think might be the best choice? Would you like to make mercantilism model, like, in the colonial period, or is this more neoclassical, like more laissez-faire, or do you see this being more like a sort of Soviet command economy style top-down rigid structure?
I've warred with that. All right, I generally come down on a laissez-faire being the best model, but in the particular case of trying to develop a Mars as developing Mars, I think there are going to be kind of developmental state leanings to it, which could be very dangerous from a human perspective. That is, but I do ask questions about that. I don't really, from a personal perspective, I love free trade. I think free trade across the solar system would benefit humanity the most. But I also understand that that leads to problems, particularly for trying to develop Mars, which is its ultimate, kind of the ultimate end there. So, yeah, right. It definitely deserves more thought from more than just me. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to do here is kickstart. Yeah.
All right. The asteroid belt The delta V from the asteroid belt inward is much greater than the delta V outward. Is there money to be made in that financial difference by just continuing the civilization outward because of the tax of delta V? I mean,
Yeah,
it's significant.
no, I'm not as well versed on those delta V requirements, right? I do have to preface everything with that, but ultimately I think the belt itself is going to end up becoming very well developed. It's just a really tough place to live, whereas Mars has basically everything we need, basically to live outside. And I do think continuing out to the outer planets is probably going to happen as well. But this is Mars society, and we're focused on Mars for the moment. But no, very good question. I definitely see civilization continuing further out. All right, there you go.
So kind of going back to the free market side of things, for certain resources like nitrogen, though there's a lot of debate on that one, but certain resources that would have to be imported to Mars, if there is already supplier parity for it, what other than constriction of the base resources would drive up the price? Because I'm always of the opinion that it's just going to cost whatever it would cost on Earth, and then you just got to pay shipping.
Well, I think that becomes, first of all, great question. That's not really something I'd super considered to this point, so please write about it. I hate being that guy that's like, you do it.
Thanks a lot.
The book's going to be Space Civilization, an inquiry into the social science elements of living and working in space. It's a mouthful. It's under review right now. Hopefully they don't spike it. I don't think they're going to spike it. But again, if one of you are my reviewer, because I did throw some Mars Society names at them, I don't know who ended up with the book, because double blind, but not double blind if you see me now. Yes, sir.
Yeah, who's your publisher?
It's going to be with Lexington Press. They're a little bit smaller, right? Focused on early stage academics, which is what I am. Buy my book. I hate doing that plug, but I've never had to do it before. So.
When's it coming out?
It should. I'm aiming for next April. I'm supposed to get it back in November, theoretically. Thank you.